While I know the middle portion of this past decade, saw the Seattle Seahawks at the top of the NFL mountain, and you looked at the Seahawks and you said, "Hey, this is a team back-to-back Super Bowl appearances, Super Bowl championship, Legion of Boom defense, blah blah blah." And you think that in and of itself can point to the greatness of the organization, the general manager, the head coach, and the quarterback. And the reality, for me at least, is it's one thing when you have that level of talent to be able to get the job done, at least to some degree. It's another thing when you don't have those expectations, when you don't have that same level of talent, and you yet still find a way to be in the mix, still be relevant, competitive, and potentially a contender that I think can point to real greatness. And while certainly I've had my issues with the Seahawks over the years in terms of their draft philosophy, their approach, and ultimately their execution, there is no doubt that these past two seasons, to me, as much of anything, have shown the greatness of both Pete Carroll as an NFL head coach and Russell Wilson as an NFL quarterback. Because they were expected to take a big step back in 2018, and that didn't happen. And then you look again here at 2019, what reason did you really have to think that they were going to be a whole lot better? And yet, and still, they were a little bit better. You make the trade, you send Frank Clark packing, and then you really look at that and you say, man, they're getting rid of their best edge rusher. What are they doing? But then, before the season starts, they're able to acquire Jadeveon Clowney for basically a bag of peanuts and dicks, and that's about it. And all the Seahawks did was go out there and start off the season 7-2, winning 3 divisional games in that stretch. And you look at them and you're saying, holy crap, they beat the 49ers. This is a possible contending team. They've got the quarterback. They've got the head coach pedigree. You looked at them and you said, this is the type of team that could potentially get there. And when they do, might be one of the teams that could actually knock off the 49ers in the playoffs. And it's just crazy how this all played out. Now, after that bye, they were 3-3, and their defense really started to struggle. Then they started getting hit with injuries at the running back position, leading to the signing before Week 17 in that Sunday night game against the 49ers of Marshawn Lynch, beast mode, back in his Seahawks uniform. Who'd have thunk that, huh? Crazy, crazy, crazy. And how fitting it is when you talk about the NFL and you talk about how razor thin the margins can be. Just how razor thin the margin is. Imagine if the Seahawks win that Week 17 game. Like the entire landscape of everything for the Seahawks, especially for the 49ers, and certainly the NFC playoff picture would have been vastly different. And that's how close it was. It was about that close. But they ultimately lost, which sent them on the road as an infinitely better team to face an NFC least division winning Philadelphia Eagles squad, which they were able to go out there and win because, Carson Wentz is healthy, made it through a season healthy. Here's Jadeveon Clowney hitting him in the back of the helmet early in the game. He's out with a dang concussion. You're relying upon Josh McCown and his torn hamstring to try and carry the day. Good Lord. But the Seahawks ultimately got it done. Then they went into Lambeau in the divisional round, in which you could say was a heartbreaking loss because while the Packers were handing it to them early, the Seahawks kept coming, and all of a sudden, late in the game, they get screwed on a call, and the team you were looking at and you were saying, if there's anybody in that NFC playoff race, especially once the Saints got eliminated by the Vikings, that could actually beat the 49ers and stop them from going to the Super Bowl, is going to be the Seahawks. It would have to be the Seahawks. Because they beat them once in the regular season, almost beat them a second time, were a divisional rival, very familiar with them, had beaten them out in the road. Like all of these things that are pointing to the Seahawks being the team that could have potentially stopped the 49ers. And it just didn't happen. And lo and behold, the Seahawks season is over. But still a really good year for the Seattle Seahawks. Chris Carson had 1,200 plus yards on the ground before his season ended. He got a good season out of Tyler Lockett. Second round pick rookie DK Metcalf played like a stud at times. He's shown himself to be a future weapon and force at the receiver position. Russell Wilson put up an MVP caliber season, all the while that Seahawks defense, not the same as it had been in the past, certainly, and ended up being the Achilles heel that sunk this team. But all in all, able to sit there and make it back to the playoffs again, win a playoff game, and you still have to feel like the Seahawks are in a pretty good spot somehow, some way. And going into this offseason, you look at this team and you say, they've got almost $60 million in salary cap space. Their quarterback's still locked up under a long-term deal. Granted, they've got to make some decisions on guys like Jadeveon Clowney, Ezekiel Ansah, but there's a little bit of money to play with here. If they want to keep Clowney, they can keep Clowney. If they want to redo some deals for guys, they can redo some deals for guys. If they want to dive in a little bit into free agency and go after it and say, you know what? We thought we were going to have to rebuild on the fly a little bit, and instead we've made the playoffs the past 2 seasons when nobody really was expecting us to in both times. Now we can sit there and get a little more aggressive and perhaps go after it, because here's my whole thing for the Seahawks, is that somehow, some way, with that quarterback and that head coach, they find a way to position themselves, even when sometimes it kind of defies logic, to be a contender. But that window of opportunity is only but so big. And if that window of opportunity is open, you best try to do your best to get as much of that outside air in as you possibly can before that window slams shut on you. So for the Seahawks, I would not be surprised to see them try and make a couple of smaller moves or middle-level moves, or maybe 1 or 2 big notable moves in free agency, because your moment and opportunity is now. The time to strike is now. You don't know what San Francisco is going to do in the offseason. It's very hard for them as a Super Bowl losing team to make it back to the Super Bowl the next season. The Rams could be in some trouble. The Cardinals may be on the come up a little bit, but they may be potentially a year away. You have a chance to sit there and take the reins of this division in 2020. You got to go do so, and you got to go be aggressive. Because you certainly don't envision a lot of that help coming from the draft, in part because the Seahawks are kind of squirrely in terms of how they do the draft. Like, you get a DK Metcalf at the end of round 2, great, but then you take LJ Collier in round 1, what are you doing? And they just don't have a lot of draft pick ammo. They've got the 27th overall pick in round 1, couple of seconds, but then only a 4th and 7th round pick. So, there could be an element there of saying, hey, if they want to get a little aggressive and move up in the draft, they could. They could potentially trade back. But again, it's one of these things for the Seahawks. It doesn't matter how much draft pick capital they get. If they don't do better, then, what difference does it really make? And then that's just the reality. In terms of the draft for this team, I think you got to look at a very heavy defensive focus, especially early on. I would anticipate multiple picks, if they keep the picks that they have, are going to be invested on that defensive line. As you can see, if Jadeveon Clowney wasn't doing something, there wasn't much else in terms of pass rush for this team. They got to get better on the edges. They got to get better on the inside, too. Jerron Reed had the suspension to start off the season, but he's just one guy, and his 10.5 sacks or whatever it was from 2018 was kind of flukish, not really the type of player that he is. They need more versatility, more ability out of that defensive front if they want to turn around this defense and help level out this team a little bit. Certainly, offensive line is a need, continues to be a need, has been a need for this team for years. I would also think on offense, they could use some help at the wide receiver position. Sure, you've got Tyler Lockett, you've got DK Metcalf, but if you could find that one more guy, then that just takes that passing game to a whole nother level. And then you could certainly make an argument that corner is going to be a need for them. I'm not huge on the defensive backs that they have right now. And you saw that at key times in the playoffs and at key moments of big games in the regular season, that secondary would come up a little bit short. So will they invest early in that space? I don't know. But nonetheless, this is a team with a little bit of cap space to play with in that moment where they have a chance to go big or go home. And what the Seahawks, to me, can't do is sit there and kind of rest on their laurels and hope that things are just going to organically get better in 2020. If they want it to happen, they've got to go make it happen. You leverage some of that money. Maybe you make a big aggressive move up the board instead of always trying to trade back and go get somebody that could potentially make an impact on your team right now. Because this team, potentially, based off of the past 2 seasons, has shown some growth to where you could think that if you do some things right, they could be in the mix for the Super Bowl next year.